Okay, I want to introduce the next panel, which is a mindful approach to interior design. And the moderator is Temi Adamolekun, sorry. Prior to moving to San Francisco to open Pembroke PR, Temi lived in London, where she spent her early career in the Condé Nast contract publishing department, working in editorial for GQ, Vogue, Tatler, Brides, and Savoy magazine, among others. She then moved to a boutique PR agency where she handled accounts for the Marco Pierre White Restaurant Group, the Cinnamon Club Zuma, and Bryant Park Hotel. Temi then launched her first business, a tea room and boutique. Boy, doesn't that sound great? Which was soon featured in UK Vogue as a global hotspot. In July 2018, Temi was asked to join the San Francisco Council of Vital Voices, a nonprofit that invests in women who are improving the world. Temi is an SF Made advisor and is delighted to be part of the team that aims to empower manufacturers, create jobs, and transform our city. Temi recently authored the book, Your Special Voice, that inspires young readers to use their own special voice to make a difference in the world. So welcome Temi and her panel.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction, Catherine. Just checking, can everyone hear me properly on the microphone? Yep, okay. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here this morning. It's definitely great to see so many faces, so much interest, and familiar faces from last year as well. Today we're going to be speaking about a more mindful approach to interior design, and we were just talking about it earlier on. Taking a mindful approach requires intention, which requires paying attention in the first place. So I'd like Lisa to introduce herself and tell us why she's an authority on design.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. In the previous panel, I'm just so excited that we have so much traction in our industry. I'm an interior designer. I've had my design studio for over 30 years. I started in New York, in upstate New York, and our whole primary directive on that project was reclaim wood, 80 species of Native American wood on the North American continent. So I began my career, and I feel very fortunate that I had a project where this was the most important part. And we didn't destroy trees, we had everything reclaimed. And then fast forward another 10 years, and I was confronted with what's the purpose of my life and what's my legacy, because I had gotten cancer. And I realized that I had to make sure that I was doing something that mattered. And in our industry, it's incredibly important that we are very aware of how we have an impact. So here I am now, fast forward again, and I've been able to create a career out of trying to make sure that we understand there's a big ripple effect to every action we have. And in our industry, we have tremendous impact.
That was under 2 minutes. A challenge. Yeah, Lisa and I have fairly somewhat similar trajectories. I also have had a design firm for over 30 years. It's in the commercial workspace in Silicon Valley. And I started to kind of question what I was doing as if you heard James mention in the last panel, we were designing these spaces for tech people to kind of continue their lives as college students. And I thought I was doing something amazing, but really I was just trying to keep people at the office longer so that the CEOs could make more money is kind of my realization. And then 3 years into the third year of the wildfires, that's when I think it was 2019, when my eyes opened to climate change, and I started to look at what my industry was doing, interior design, and I saw AIA had made commitments to climate change, like it was the most urgent and sustained action was necessary, but the IASID, IIDA just had crickets, absolutely nothing. And so I wrote an article in Fast Company challenging our industry to make a commitment to climate change. And that was in January of 2020, and since then I've just been on this warpath, getting on the biggest soapbox I can to raise awareness around climate change. I've been lucky enough to partner with Metropolis as an editor at large to go around the nation raising awareness and educating architects and designers around what they can do to change their design practices to really address climate change and the future for the planet.
Okay, thank you very much. So today we're going to be focusing our conversation on the built environment. Our living spaces have so much impact, positive and negative, on how we feel, on our health, physical, emotional, mental, social, psychological. And I also just want to draw attention to the fact that this audience today, we're all stewards in so many ways, responsible for the built environment. We're here today as we're collectively in an industry where we're framers, contributors, creatives, and visionaries of the built environment. So we've had a couple of meetings to kind of talk through what we want to focus on, and we really want our conversation to be focused on action. So our goal is to give you actionable takeaways that you can all start implementing straight away. And we just really want to focus on what can we do and what are the tools. So we came up with 5 different focal points that we're going to talk through today, and then we'll open up the floor at the end for some questions from the audience. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is reuse. And what we're going to do, Verda's going to talk to the context in the commercial and hospitality space, and Lisa's going to speak to the context in the residential space. So Lisa, if we could start with you, what does reuse mean for you?
So I think what's important to think about with reuse, and I'm going to say that we all have to stop using the word recycle to start, because that's a buzzword. It's overused, and it's empty, and it's destroying our planet. We need to do a lot more than just recycle things, and that's not going to, so you just better push it back to everybody on that word. So reuse, you go into a project, we do about 80% residential and 20% commercial, but the first thing I want to do is walk in and say, what are we going to use here? What can we bring with us? What can we keep in the project? And then the next part is going to be, where can what is here you don't want go? And we don't just assume it's going to go into, someone's going to come and just demo it. There's a great opportunities to make sure it goes to another life, another person's environment, people who need things. So part of my team and part of what we do is we look deeply into how can it, like if it's a neighborhood and we're getting rid of the kitchen or the doors or the plumbing, we might post it on Nextdoor if that's what it's called or whatever that community is, and someone may just come and get it before you start the process of reconstruction or remodeling the project. Then there's also the group of people that I work with that will come in and make sure the people in the home know that those things they don't want can go to another life. And so that's part of the process. And also then if it wants to go to another organization, as you heard in the first panel, there's great opportunities for where things can go. That we actually, I find in the beginning of a project, if I let my clients know that this is an opportunity, you don't just get rid of everything from your life and your past, they go, oh, I didn't realize I could do that. They just didn't know. So as stewards and visionaries and leaders in our field, we can plant those seeds for our clients. So I go into every project, both residential and commercial, and say, what can we bring with us? Can we reupholster it? Can we save that? Can we just give it a new shade or something? Those are just small examples. So that's how I look at every project. And there's always a foundation of questions and how we can keep or let things move on, but actually help other humans as well. Because really we have a responsibility to each other as humans on this planet to do the right thing so we don't continue to bury ourselves in all this waste we're creating.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Verda.
Yeah, I'm going to start by piggybacking on the last panel. It really set the stage really well. They were talking about waste and landfill, but I think with America being as big as it is, there's so much space for landfill. I think the bigger problem is embodied carbon. Every product that comes into this world, if it's created with virgin material, there is a cost. There's a toll. There's deforestation, mining, whatever, and then all the manufacturing that goes into creating that product, and that is called embodied carbon. And when I was doing my research early on, I found that the construction industry is responsible for 40% of CO2 emissions. And a larger percentage of that is operation, so the energy it takes to operate buildings, but as we become more efficient, that embodied carbon number is getting larger, and it's about 1/4 to 1/3 right now. And so if we can tackle that through reuse, that is what I'd like to see happen. And in the commercial industry, we do hundreds of thousands of square foot spaces, and there was a study in Metropolis in the early 2020s that talked about how interior and design industry, you think that the building itself, the embodied carbon in all the metal and all the concrete, it's huge, right? It's a huge number. But because interior designers, and especially in the commercial world, we have this renovation cycle, and offices are renovated every 5 to 7 years, sometimes more if it's more like law firms and things, but tech firms for 3 to 5 years often. And if you calculate those renovation cycles and all the material that goes to landfill, which is typically all of it, everybody wants the white box TI, it's potentially a bigger number than what the architect's impact is. And so we have a huge responsibility here to really try to reuse a lot of material. And then if you dig deeper and you look at the composition of that stuff that's going to landfill, there was a study done by MSR Architects that they actually calculated, they looked at all the stuff, if they reused things, all the stuff in the as much as they could in a renovation, and they carefully calculated it. They discovered if they reused just the furniture alone, they could save like 30 to 50% of the embodied carbon in a space. Like, that would be a bonus, a savings. And looking at furniture to all that stuff to landfill that James and that team talked about, the panel talked about earlier, maybe up to half of that is commercial office furniture. So there is something that we need to do, obviously.
Okay, thank you for that, Verda. The next thing that we're going to speak about today is finding lower carbon options, and I feel you already touched on that with a lot of your response. Is there anything else that you want to add to that for everyone to think about in terms of actionable steps to find lower carbon options?
Sure, yeah. And yeah, we need the technology, we need the tools. We don't have them quite yet in the commercial industry, and I'm sure we don't have them in the residential to actually calculate the carbon of furniture and things like that. But it's coming, and hopefully very, very soon. But there are ways to look at, there are numbers, general numbers out there to understand the embodied carbon of a chair or a carpet tile or a workstation. So I think just becoming familiar with those numbers and starting to understand that the things that are higher in embodied carbon are plastic, are metals, are those highly refined virgin materials that are hard to extract and hard to process. And the things that are lower in embodied carbon are going to be wood, all the natural materials. So, I mean, if you're going to lower your embodied carbon, use natural materials. And again, if you're going to lower your embodied carbon, you can lower your embodied carbon vastly by just reusing product.
I think it would also be, when I think of carbon and carbon footprint, something that I think about, and we try to create with a lot of projects, or I do my own fundamental underlying research with all the organizations, companies, manufacturers, anyone we work with, I care deeply about how is it made, how did it get there, what is it made of? And so carbon can be, I think, also how it gets there. Could we call that what's the carbon footprint? I work with companies who bring things from the East Coast. They'll use biodiesel, or how do they have their trucks run? How do they run their factories? Do they have solar? That carbon question is so deep and so layered. It can go all the way from the beginning, and how the other manufacturers, where we get all these things, all this stuff, how is it made? What is its imprint where it's made in the world? Because we work with companies all around the globe. And what's the leadership like? So carbon as a word, as an individual word, and the footprint and what it does to the off-gassing. I consider carbon creates an off-gassing. I think that's fair to say also, that there's this huge supply chain that we need to look at and go, we can make a difference from the very beginning. And it's really important to know how the carbon emissions are being made from the top. Who has the vision? Who runs these companies? Who makes things? And the amazing thing is, a lot of companies care, and this is their now foundational ethos for our future of our planet, not just the beautiful things we specify. Now, also specifying things that are really nasty. Maybe we think about, okay, that's beautiful, maybe we have to have it. As designers and interior designers and residential designers, sometimes we get pretty hooked on it has to be just that, and it may have a bigger carbon footprint. Let's rethink it. Let's just make sure there's not an amazing artist out there that we can give them the business, and they have a lower carbon footprint in the world, and they can do something beautiful. Let's think outside the box. So the carbon impact, which is extraordinary, tremendous, and really dangerous, we have choices as we begin to make our decisions.
Thank you for that. I also just want to draw the analogy with what you both said with food, because I think we get so much messaging about focusing on food that is local. So, same thing for design. Find people that are local, because then there's going to be a lower carbon footprint if you're choosing someone who's in California versus if you're shipping something in from a country that's thousands of miles away. And then also what I heard from what you were both saying is focus on organic materials, which is what we're told in food. You want things that are minimally processed. You want things that are as close to their natural state as possible. So I just thought that was a really interesting analogy that I heard as you were both talking. The next thing that we want to focus on is how to use less materials in projects. So Verda, if you could talk about that in the commercial context.
Sure. And this is a really tough one to implement. I will be the first to acknowledge that my firm is horrible. We love bespoke commercial interiors, and our material palettes are massive. We use so many different materials in a project, but it's this idea. I'm actually judging the Planet Positive Awards for Metropolis right now, and I'm really impressed with this task chair. The strategy that this firm took on is to, if you think of a task chair, it's got little plastic levers, it's got metal pieces, it's got plastic pieces, it's got foam, it's got springs, it's got fabric, it's got all these parts and pieces, and their strategy is to reduce the amount of material, the different types of materials to like 3 or 4, and then to build it in such a way that it can actually be disassembled and those pieces can be easily recycled. And so think about a space and all the materials in a space, and what the group last time was talking about in terms of deconstructing a project. It's a lot easier to deconstruct something if there's less types of materials. Hard to implement, but I think it's something to really keep in mind as you're designing your spaces. And I think that's something, I don't know if we're going to touch on it, but a lot of what needs to happen and in order to start thinking about deconstruction is to think about, we can start thinking about it now before we start designing, and that's when you really want to start planning for how is this wood floor going to get taken out? How are these light fixtures going to be taken out and reused? And just starting to even if it's just you're just thinking about it and there's really nothing specific that you're actually doing, at least it's part of your thought process in your design process.
Yeah, I think that materials and having less materials, it's really, I think, having maybe less of too many different materials and really breaking apart each individual item and understanding how it's made and all the components that go into it. And there's nothing wrong with the simplicity. It can still be beautiful and complex. But I think as an industry, how we think about how it's all put together and the layers, that those materials, you break it down, you deconstruct it and say, do we want to have that beautiful, complex material? If it has so many steps and gets so complicated, is it something we really want to use? So I think in the world of residential design, materials and many materials are very common, just as in the most beautiful commercial spaces. But if there's an integrity to all those materials, I think we're really saying, ask the question, break it apart, and work with the companies that invite your questions. Work with the companies who care about your questions. Don't just say, well, it's cheaper for me to make it that way, and I'm just putting all this stuff in there because it's easier to glue it together. Well, what is in the glue, and do I want it with glue? And these material questions really, really important, and simplicity is good. I mean, the most beautiful building techniques are simple. Some of them don't even have nails. Some don't have plastic. Some don't have glue. Yeah, sometimes you pay more. But I believe we can hopefully begin to evolve towards that too, where maybe we'll realize it's not worth it to have the really cheap, horrible stuff where there's lots of it in an object, that we have less of it and we can start a movement. Just like the previous panel, we actually do have power to make change in our industry. It's extraordinary. So the material question is really good as long as we're willing as a profession to question it and break it apart and understand it. It's really quite amazing.
Okay, thank you both for that. So what I heard with both of you is focus on simplicity, and just allowing the materials that you're choosing to be beautiful. That's a great way to use less of the materials. And then also starting with the end goal in mind in terms of what the finished product's going to look like, and then also just like the lifespan of each item, like what's it going to look like 50, 40, 30, 20 years down the line, and just really being mindful of that too, which actually takes us nicely to our next focal point, which is to think about the lifespan of the items that you're incorporating into the spaces. So Verda, would you like to speak to that in the commercial context?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, right? So in a commercial workspace, right, there's the lobby, which is often common. There's the tenant space. There's certain parts of the tenant space that might continue beyond the lease, like maybe like if there's some sort of ceramic tile or stone flooring, or maybe the ceiling. But there's also elements that are, especially elements that are highly branded, that are going to get demolished and sent right to the landfill as soon as they're done. And so thinking about, could this reception desk be designed in something that's compostable? There's actually companies that are experimenting with compostable chairs. They know these chairs they're probably going to go to landfill at 3 years. So why not make them compostable at 5 years? So it's kind of an interesting, also a very new idea, but to think about what can last a long time. Like I keep referring to the pan, they were such a great tee up. James was talking about the best thing you can do is basically to leave everything intact. So thinking about what can actually remain and investing the higher carbon elements that have that aren't trendy and that have this longevity in terms of aesthetics in certain areas, and then thinking about the things that could, like wallpaper or wall covering, that could be removed and it's not glued down, and things like that. And then of course branded elements, maybe convincing the client to try to think about taking their branded elements with them to the next space and things like that. And so lifespan, this carpet is meant to last 50 years. I think we need to think about, is this carpet going to be here? Does it make sense to design, put a carpet in here, in this space, knowing that's going to last 50 years? And if it gets demoed in 10 years, it's most likely going to go to landfill.
And it's a complex question, because the carpet's a great example. And there's great carpet companies who deconstruct this and care deeply. Interface does the tiles, so if you have a stain, you just take a tile out and put it in. You don't have to tear out the whole room. So the lifespan of materials, I also think it goes hand in hand with really understanding the manufacturing, and do they take these materials back? Carpet's a big offender in the industry that we're in. So what do they do as manufacturers? How do they reuse? How do they grind it up? How do they use it for new product? One of my first project with O+A was over 20 years ago, and the office is still beautiful, and we used a lot of reclaimed wood. We did the front entry desk was reclaimed wood. It's a textbook company. It's now all online, but back then we used all the old textbooks from around the country. We had thousands of them. We built them into the desk, and it became their brand, because we don't want to forget that books are useful. Yeah, we might like to read on our devices, but humans, books are part of our evolution and our legacy as humans. But the reclaimed wood is still there. It's beautiful. And I did have to say it's really worth it, and luckily the CEO was really behind it. And part of the story of that space is people feel different in it, because it's surrounded by materials that have true authenticity, and they last. And so and then there's great tile companies that use tile where they've ground it up and reworked it, and they care deeply about a product lasting, and if it doesn't, that it gets reused and recreated. So that idea of longevity of materials, it doesn't. I think sometimes there's maybe pushback. Oh, that means it's more expensive, or that's more complicated. It actually isn't. And to kind of demystify that for the end users, because we often have to present to clients and to facilities teams and to people running the budgets, so that you can say, this is actually going to really last you a long time, and it's not going to fall off, and it's not going to become old, and it's not going to fade. So it's a really good question, and there's a lot of wonderful materials out there that have long lifespans. And even if you have to change it, wallpaper, the reclaimed wood walls we did for this first project, it was in Santa Clara, I did with your team. It removes, so if they change their mind and don't want those reclaimed wood panels in the stairwells, we can remove them from the walls. And I've used them at Stanford, I've used them in other commercial jobs, not those same ones, but they designed the tape, the way it adheres. They did a lot of research on the type of tape adherence it had. We can reuse it. Maybe there's another job that wants it. So just the fact that you have a material that won't disintegrate when you remove it, that's incredible, right? That the company who made it cares as much as we do as the designers, architects, and builders, and we're all together in this process.
Thank you for that. So I think we all heard that there's so much power, there's so much agency we all have in the choices that we choose to make. So just being really intentional from the get-go and paying attention to the people that you choose to work with, to just really focus on high quality materials. And I love what you said, Lisa, about the impact of how a space feels when you focus on those kind of materials. I think you presented a really strong visual. We could all visualize the space that you designed together. And it just feels, it sounds like it would feel really good to be in a space made with natural materials. So I think that's something we can all be much more intentional about. And then the last thing that we want to focus on today is the ripple effect. We had a very interesting, lively conversation around this. So I'll just hand over to you, Verda, if you could tell us what the ripple effect means for you.
Sure, and I just completely blanked. No, okay. Yeah, actually, you teed me up perfectly because you were talking about designers having an impact with every specification, everything that they specify. And commercial interior designers, will specify a carpet for hundreds of thousands of square feet spaces. And there was a study done, I think it was LMN Architects, where they looked at just by selecting a lower embodied carbon carpet, so still using carpet, it's just a lower embodied carbon carpet, they saved like 85% of the carbon emissions, which was the equivalent on an 85,000 square foot, 8,500 square foot space. It was the equivalent of taking 10 cars off the road. So think about what 100,000 square foot space, just specifying something that is natural or is a lower embodied carbon or is reusable, the impact that you have as an individual designer. We have, I think Metropolis's quote is, we have 100 times the impact of an individual in our choices. And in terms of ripple effect specifically, I think of ripple effect being, as individuals, we make the change. We're the pebble. That's what Catherine said at the very beginning. But then we expand that into our relationships, our friends, our family, and then we expand that into our community, which is the people we work with, the associations that we have, like ASID, IIDA, and then that expands into bringing that out into the world, either through wonderful PR firms or legislation, ultimately, is the ideal goal, because that really changes things quickly. But it really starts with individuals socializing something to the point. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of people, but just enough to socialize it to where it kind of becomes a little bit acceptable, right? And I think about like the grocery bags, like bringing in your anybody that did that in the 90s was looked at like a weirdo hippie, right? And now it's something that we all do, and of course it's been legislated in California. And then last but not least, I leveraged my association. Chris is here, part of the Climate Action Committee. We go around to each other's firms and we learn from each other. And we just published a little zine talking about all the different stops that we did in 2023 at different offices. James was at one of them with Gensler. And I have about 10 or so of these, so grab me afterwards if you want a copy.
So when we were preparing for this panel, we went through lots of topics. You can go into lots of rabbit holes. It's complex. It's very, it can kind of be scary, like where do I start? Well, I had the honor of my career. I worked with O+A over 20 years ago on a project we did together, and to have no other companies are out there with a shared vision. You're not alone. That ripple effect is profound and real, and it keeps moving. So it can start with us individually, and also we can have a tremendous impact if we just do one thing. It doesn't have to be everything, because you know how overwhelming that can be. We can't solve all these problems all at once, but collectively, as long as I really want this to be foundational to every education program in the country and the world, every design school, every architecture school, every contractor, licensing, accreditation. You have to have this as a foundation. We're going out into the world and we are really making a difference. And we don't have slides up today, but my last slide, I had a ripple effect slide, but one was a hand holding a seedling in rich soil. Because in my world, our world of furnishings is next year, I think it's estimated to be $700 to $800 billion in stuff on this planet. Just stuff. Well, if you make a decision about that stuff, that's real power to say that I can choose stuff, that has an impact, and it has a ripple effect that together we can do this if we ask the right questions and align ourselves with the right leadership of companies who care as deeply as we want to care. Sometimes you don't know where to start, so you just start with asking the questions. How do you make it? What is it made of? What do you care about? How do you treat people? What are we doing for our planet together collectively as for the human race so we can survive? And everyone is talking about how we're burying ourselves in trash and plastic, and we're poisoning ourselves with all these emissions. Well, it's kind of real, but let's not be gloom and doom. I believe there's a lot of hope, and we can keep that seedling alive in soil that's rich, because together the ripple effect is so profound. So we really wanted this conversation to be positive, because, I mean, I know for me, it's hard for me to sleep a lot. I get pretty wound up about these things. And how do we know we're doing the right thing every day? Because there's so many demands on us and so much pressure, and we're under budgets and clients, you know, and all the things coming at us. But if you go back out there and realize there's people that care and they want to help you get there. So that ripple effect is real. And I believe, to me, it's a foundational element to how I really try to look at the world, so you realize we're not alone. So we align ourselves with those other humans, right? And it's pretty remarkable. So I hope we've given you some hope today, and we haven't scared you into all the responsibility you hold in your hands, which is a lot. You do all hold a lot of responsibility. So it's pretty incredible.
Thank you for that. So just to paraphrase what you both said, I think the example you gave, Verda, of the plastic bags in supermarkets, grocery stores is such a good one, because you're right, 20 years ago, that was the norm. Everyone used plastic bags, whereas today, if you went to a grocery store and they gave you a plastic bag, you'd be so confused as to why they're giving you a plastic bag. And it just also shows the power of visibility and education. That's something that we spoke about earlier. I think a lot of the time, people genuinely don't know there are alternatives available until they're presented with an alternative. So I think as stewards of the industry, that's a responsibility we can all hold. And then also just really thinking through the intention with which you bring things into your own home, the intention with which you bring things into your agencies, and then the intention with which you put out work from your agency. Because I think when you think about it in those three different categories, it becomes really easy to see how impactful the ripple effect that we all have collectively in this room can be. So I just wanted to paraphrase that. And also just to say thank you both to you for sharing so much information, for giving us so many different actionable points, for getting us really thinking, for sharing the education piece. We also mentioned earlier, education never stops. We're all always learning. The goal should be to keep learning. If you think you know everything, you probably know very little. So just always keep learning, just staying open-minded. There's always new information coming out in so many different arenas, and just as much as you can, you mentioned this, Verda, as well, just sharing that information with other colleagues in the industry, because they might genuinely not know something new has arrived in the marketplace until you tell them about it. So just being really clear to just keep that communication around education open at all times. I would love to open the floor for questions. So if you just raise your hand, we'll get a microphone over to you for the people that have questions for us.
Check.
Hi, my name is Jim Gurley. I'm actually part of the NKBA, the National Kitchen and Bath Association, so I really appreciate what you're doing. Like you said, it's a leadership moment, right? We have to, so I'm going to actually do a talk next month for the NKBA, and this is how I framed it. So I'm asking for your feedback, but I think we have to do a better job as an industry to frame the problem, identify the problem. So the framework that I used was to identify the problem as the linear economy, the way we're all making money right now. And then the solution to the problem is the circular economy. But we have to explain the opportunities within these changes. And I think we've done I'm going to say a poor job. I think it's time to start to say, what are the opportunities in this new industry, which is the circular economy? There are specifics, and ours is there's services. We have to be able to commercialize and monetize these opportunities. So my question for all of you is, what are the opportunities, and how can we reframe this to industry, specifically in my case, kitchen renovation, so they get excited about the opportunities. Instead of just talking about the problem, let's talk about the opportunities. So I'm interested in your comments on that.
Thank you for that. I love the question, which I'll paraphrase in a second. I think one of the things that we've all heard so often is you can only get a good answer by asking the right questions. So I love the way that you frame that and just saying that the design industry historically hasn't done a great job of asking the right question. So you referenced we're all looking at it as a linear situation. That's the question, and the solution lies in a circular economy, and we need to focus on how to monetize the opportunities. Is that accurate?
But yes, identify the problem as the current linear economy. The solution to that problem is the circular economy, and then what are the opportunities that serve the new circular economy? So yeah, that's exactly the framework. But again, I have my ideas, it's not my talk, about what we can do for the kitchen renovation industry. I want to hear from all of you. What are those opportunities, and how could we present those today and then going forward?
We could spend an hour talking about the circular economy and the challenges with our capitalistic system to meet that, right? And I'm thinking about the commercial furniture manufacturing industry is huge, and it's based on selling a lot of new stuff, right? I go to Neocon, and it's all about new releases, new product, everything. And there are a couple of behemoths, I'm not going to name names, like one is not doing much at all, another one is really trying to embrace this. I will put a plug in, I do have a podcast called Break Some Dishes, and I did an interview with Davies Office Furniture, you might be interested. They're one of the biggest right now commercial furniture refurbishers, and they're going to partner with one of the biggest commercial manufacturers. And I think it's these manufacturers wrapping their head around a different business model and a different profit model, and it's going to take time, but it's possible. And I think I don't want to get too much farther into it.
I think in the kitchen remodeling world, because I do a lot of remodeling also, in addition to ground-up construction and refurbishing, I think the circular question comes into play when you have the alignments with other organizations like countertops, how they're made, how they can be taken out, reused, or ground up, plumbing, lighting, hardware, cabinets. So I think if we go into it, and especially in remodeling, because you're taking something out to put something in. And for me, I find it starts with when I go to those very first meetings with clients, and I'm usually one of the first ones. I often bring the team together and find the builder. Sometimes I come in with the architect, or I bring the architectural firm. I say, it's really important we look at this in a whole way, that you have choices. And many times clients don't know they have choices. They go, I didn't know that. So then we can help each other succeed in providing the product at the end, and where the product they have is going to go. And there's great networks for that, and organizations and manufacturers that care deeply about what that product's going to be and what's going to happen with the old product. So I think it's a complicated question. There's lots of layers to it, but the circularity is you do have a big network of people trying to do the right thing to make sure it gets reused, repurposed, and the new things are made in the right way, and you have a choice. And every element, as you know, plumbing, lighting, hardware, finishes, flooring, all the things, and as well as, and you need to align. And in commercial, you have a little more power, maybe financial power, to have the bigger companies. But I'm finding in residential, when you work with the really major players and how things are supplied, they can have also the same kind of impacts with that circular thinking. But I do believe it starts that first meeting, or on podcasts, or we both speak a lot, we write, we care deeply, that you plant the seeds that these things, you can do something about it, and it isn't linear anymore. If it's linear, it's probably just not, your business won't survive. We have to constantly be thinking about the circular part, because we won't make it, right?
I'm sorry to overtake, but yes, thank you. That's exactly what I was saying. Respectfully, I can't speak for the commercial industry, because my expertise is in residential. I respectfully disagree with you. The manufacturers, that mind that created that problem is not going to be the same mind that solves that problem. I don't believe manufacturers are the solution to this problem in the circular. Sure, if you're really, really big, they'll have some impact, but I'm with you. It starts with you as the designer.
The manufacturers are essential for us.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're the solution, but they got to get on board.
No
Otherwise,
question,
we're not going to make it.
I'm not at all disagreeing. I'm just being the solution is somewhere else. I really believe it.
They're part of it. It's part of it.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we all saw that's a conversation that could definitely go on for a really long time, so we just had to do like cliff notes. Okay, so we've got a question at the back.
Yeah, hi. My name's Jamie. I work for a program called Green Health Approved. I'm the sustainability director there. I also happen to be a nurse in the ER here at San Francisco General. So I very much see the chronic and acute issues that are related to a lot of the stuff we see in our environment firsthand on the clinical side. But to my corporate grind, as I like to call it, we are looking at chemicals of concern in the built environment. And I just want to reiterate, this has been a beautiful discussion about the ripple effect. And I would like to just comment that the designers and architects in these commercial and residential projects absolutely can define what suppliers will make. If you requested and or demand that certain products are made without certain chemicals of concern, that absolutely has a through the manufacturing side of things. We particularly are looking at, forever chemicals, plastics, DEHP in our supply chain, really trying to get them out. We do the vetting and validating for you so that when you're looking for products, you don't have to spend all your time and energy looking through the chemicals of concern. We are happy to do that for you. That's my plug, but also I would like to ask, especially for Verda, in your commercial projects, when you are speccing carpet, flooring, furniture, how are you ensuring that your products are meeting certain standards, and or what standards are you looking for specifically for chemicals of concern? Thanks.
Yeah, even though the question's directed at me, I'm all able to answer, but you wanted to talk about chemicals and health, so why don't you start?
Well, like I said, we were trying to decide how to start this topic, and I've had cancer, so I know that our environments make us sick. I'm not blaming my environments on making me sick many years ago. However, I know they make you sick. I've done a deep dive because I did get sick and I had to be cured in a hospital. And I started doing lots of research on it, and I write about it, and I tell my clients about it, because all of us know what it's like to walk into a space and have a reaction. And even in your home, somebody did a floor, they did a paint, and I can't breathe. Like, it affects me. Bondo, like, if I see Bondo on a site, I'm going to throw the guy off. I'm like, oh my God, she's coming. I got to hide the Bondo. I go, you're breathing that stuff. Quartz, we shouldn't be using quartz. It's killing people. That's a different topic, but you're in a hospital environment, absolutely, and thankfully there's manufacturers, which relates to the commercial environment. They care deeply about what's going in, and when people say, oh, it'll be inert. When is it inert? How long does inert take? So it's critical that we have these impacts and research and gatekeepers who do the research that we can trust. And as the specifiers, we know we can trust your research. We can go to the manufacturers, and believe it or not, they will listen. I go to all the trade shows. You tell the person who, I want to meet the top, by the way, who owns the company making that tile? Okay, how are you doing this? Do you know you could make people sick? And they go, I know that. This is what I'm doing about it. So the beauty is the manufacturers, the owners, the creators, people with all the resources pulling in all this stuff, they're doing something about it. And if they're not, don't work with them. Whatever you do, you have permission not to work with them. And I know that your firm is really major in this. You are major gatekeepers, so you can comment.
Yeah, I feel like that movement's maybe a little older than the sustainability, especially the carbon movement, and I kind of really became aware, similar to you, I had a thyroid issue, and my doctor said it was the PBDEs that are in carpet, that are in the flame retardants that are basically put into everything, and of course that is now illegal in California. There's a law that passed in 2014, I think it was. And I think that legislation has really pushed manufacturers to look more carefully at their materials. And I think for a much longer time than designers looking at embodied carbon, designers have been asking for healthier products. And Perkins and Will came out with something called the chemicals of concern. I'm sure, it's red list free. And so a lot of times we will look for red list free or red list guaranteed product when we specify. I think one thing that's kind of magical and amazing is that, for example, Metropolis has a climate toolkit, and that talks about all these strategies that you can take, but it doesn't really get into health of materials. Because if you specify a lower embodied carbon product, it almost always is a healthier product. surprise. I mean, it's kind of a win-win, right? And so there's that, right? But it still doesn't mean that you can't not do your due diligence. But a lot of these efforts are aligned. Thank goodness.
And I think they will be part of the future of education and accreditation and licensing and conducting yourself in business, that you need to understand the impact that all these things have on our human life. By the way, we wouldn't have built environments if we weren't humans building it. Let's get real here. If we're killing ourselves with all this poison we're putting out into our environments, but you need to do it in a very empathetic, kind way. You can't just start scaring everybody away and say, you better get with it. Say, that could have an adverse effect, and there's been studies. So you just try to approach it where it's approachable and you don't scare people away, and don't say, I can't talk to her, she's too hardcore. I mean, as an industry, we need to be receptive that people just don't know, and they're also trying to do it cheaper, and you have huge budgets in commercial work or hospital work, but you're seeing it directly. You see people getting sick or coming in with reactions, so.
And just to add one last thing, stain-resistant coatings is a great example in the commercial industry. I think it might have been Human Scale that did a study on the efficacy of that, and it turns out that coating doesn't last very long. It doesn't really do a whole lot, and when it rubs off, it rubs right off onto your skin, and a lot of it's on chairs and upholstery, and right into your body. And so designers have been asking for no stain-resistant coatings for several years, and now hardly anybody even offers it. So, ripple effect.
Thank you both for that. I also just want to emphasize, obviously I didn't grow up in California, my accent's a dead giveaway. I think it's really easy to forget that California is a global leader in so many different categories, and this is another category in which we're a global leader. So we might be saying a lot of these things first, we might be doing a lot of these things first, but everyone else will follow. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Okay, I think we have three more.
Hi, everyone. This is Saran from Remove. Your discussion really inspired me to see if we can create a tool that might be able to help interior designers. Just by a show of hands, how many interior designers do we have in here? Okay, cool. If we're to build a product where you can go ahead and enter all the furniture that have in your proposal packages for your clients, and we're able to kind of quantify the carbon footprint equivalent for those products, would that be a useful tool for, oh, it would be, okay, cool. So essentially, that's something that we could produce in weeks in terms of adding that as like a tool for interior designers, where you can just go ahead and put in all the different items that you have in your proposal packages, and you can go ahead and give it to your clients, say, here's option A, here's option B, here's the carbon footprint equivalent of how much impact it's having, and here's the other one. And
I would pay a subscription fee for that, because we create eco reports, and I don't bill my clients for them. I just need to know as much as I can, and we try to do it for everything, but it's time consuming. Some of my team is here, they know it takes time. Mm-hmm. But if I could pay a subscription fee and know that you're doing your due diligence, and I can present that, because everything takes time. So in our industry, if we can help each other, because as small business owners, sometimes you go, well, gosh, I just have to absorb that. But it should be part of what we do. So I really appreciate you thinking about that.
Sure, absolutely. And we could build it for free. There's no need for subscription. Raise of hands who would use this tool that's an interior designer. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have 2 more questions.
Hello, I'm Andrea. I'm an interior designer from Tahoe. And actually, what you mentioned about the time it takes, that was kind of my question, which is, as a small residential interior designer, everything I've heard today, I've heard it before in some way, and I feel like in order to effectively convey this information to either contractors, clients, whoever, architects, I feel like I need to be armed fully with like research, and I need to have really hard facts that I could just hand over to them, and that takes a ton of time. So how would you suggest balancing, we have to do the design work, that's how we make money, but there also requires a ton of research, and sometimes there isn't time to do it all. And so curious how you would maybe divide up the time. Like, is it like 1 day a week you just dedicate to continuing education? And then also, yeah, for your clients, if you are doing research into like alternative fastening or like a new product and you need to do your due diligence on it, does that get billed to the client or do you just absorb it?
I don't bill the client, and I'm sure my operations team would say, boy, that's not a good idea, but I just feel like I can't if I'm trying to offer them information that's going to help me in the future. So I've had some clients actually who that's a requirement and they'll pay for it, a few, and there's no budget. But in general, I want this to be for everything. And I think going armed is important. Now, contractors, that's a different discussion. I certainly get resistance in my commercial work. So I go in and say, now thankful for the first panel, thank you so much, that I can say, here are these resources, and now I know that I'm not alone. I might just say, I know you can do this, I know you can do that. They're going to say, well, where do I go and how do I do it? And this is expensive. If you go in and say, okay, these organizations will help, and then I can go to the client and say, would you be open to whatever, we don't know the numbers exactly, but for your project, I would like to explore this for you. Yeah, and there's never enough hours in the day, as you know. Interior designers, I think we're just a breed that we just don't seem to sleep, and it's always seemed to be crazy. But I would like to say, as a collectively, we just try to, in the Tahoe, my builder in Tahoe was very open actually to making sure there was reuse. So try to just ask, will you be open to this before you jump in too deep and say, can if I help to find out who the best places are to pick this stuff up? But the time is really tricky, and I don't have that answer except for I do my best to try to put it into the project, and I do ask the client how much it matters to them. And if they say, well, I'm not sure that's really that important to me, I go, well, it's important to me, so I'm going to try to do the right thing. And you can ask if they're willing to pay a surcharge or if you just have to absorb it and it takes you to the next job. So sometimes it's not just about the money, but it's a tricky question.
Just to add to what Lisa just said, I think you could also look at it from the perspective of being something that differentiates your firm from other firms. So it's not necessarily that you get to pass on the cost straight away, which is difficult to do when you're just starting out. I don't know how long you've been in business for, but over time it could be a really significant point of differentiation. I think in the context of Tahoe, you've seen the big push that happened around the pandemic. A lot of those people have resold. So now you're looking at like long-term owners again, and I think just that intention piece could be something that differentiates your firm from other firms. Okay, I think we have one more question. Ooh.
It was just a little chime in on the conversation about software, which actually I think gets to this point about how we save time so that it can be something you can incorporate into your business. So I love it all. I wanted to just add a couple of resources for people. I'm Lindsay Baker. I'm the CEO of Living Future. I'm going to talk later, so I'll try to add a couple things in, but in case you're not there later. So we run the Red List program that Verda mentioned, and we have a label that's called Declare that has thousands of products that you can use that are vetted to be Red List free. We just got a grant from the EPA. We're going to build a little sister label on embodied carbon and other environmental impacts. So we're going to try to wrap that in also with social impact. So you'll have the sort of all of that information in one easy to use kind of system, and we verify all of that with manufacturers. So we work with a lot of software platforms that help to make sure that this is kind of easy to find those materials and things. I want to say, I think there's still really some great value in the offer that the gentleman over here put out, because for what we have at this point in that ecosystem, in my observation, is more tools to help you vet and find and compare materials at the full building scale and less for interior designers. But by using the structures that are already there, things like embodied carbon calculator tool, EC3, which is a free tool offered by the nonprofit Building Transparency. There's C-Scale, which is just getting started here in the Bay. They do a lot of sort of more building scale, early stage comparison tools and things. So it's an emerging ecosystem for sure, but there's a lot already out there. And if anyone's looking for a particular tool or something, I'll be here over lunch and I'd be happy to help you navigate all the different software questions and vetting tools and labels and all of that. It's a growing ecosystem. There's a lot of opportunity for improvement and tangible, of course, and Ellie's here, so yeah.
I'm even wondering if there's a way, as an industry, I could take all my research and put it someplace so you have access to it. If I've done houses in Tahoe, I've done houses all over the country and a little bit in Europe, why not give you my list? I mean, this is all about sharing. We're here to help each other. It's not about anything. It's so important, right? If I could help you save all those hours, I just wondered, I might talk to ASAD, AIA, I belong to lots of networks. Like you belong to amazing networks. Maybe we can help each other.
That's great. Thank you. So are we wrapping up? Because we have time for one more question. If not, we're going to break for lunch. And I will say that we will have some talk about software at 12:40 or 12:45, if you'd like. We do have our next speakers after the lunch, so we're going to cut lunch just a little bit short so we can pick this discussion up. And there's also other people in the group today that come from the software industry, so you might want to grab them at lunchtime. But great discussion. Thank you all for bringing this up. Thanks.